Hi, I'm Nathan from Serious Geeks, and in this video I'm going to talk about the Heavy Intercessor Squad for Codex Space Marines. A relatively new unit for Space Marine players, the Heavy Intercessor Squad is the most resilient and heavily armoured unit that can be taken as a troops choice for Space Marines. The current points value for Heavy Intercessor Squads is 28 points a model with a 10-point upgrade for whatever heavy weapon you want. For the majority of players, this means that they're going to pay 150 points on a single squad of Heavy Intercessor Marines, which would be 5-man units. For the most part, people are going to take these squads in the very minimum squad size of 5-man, and that's because they have quite a large footprint, so they'll take up a lot of board space. They can only cover so much space and so many objectives, and there's no point having too many of them. You're better off having several units of them than having one big unit. And also because they're quite survivable. The toughness 5 and they have 3 wounds apiece, and they also have access to a Stratagem Support that helps them achieve a little bit more resilience, which I'll go over later on. So checking out their stat line, they have a movement of 5, which is actually quite slow. This is a little bit of a problem since they're going to be largely foot slogging models. Again, I'll go over that later on. They are 3+ weapon skill and ballistic skill, which is standard for Marines, is what we expect. Strength 4, again, we don't expect any more than that. They're not a close combat melee unit. They are basic Marines, but they're standing there with strength 4, which means they can at least put out a little bit in close combat. So they're not completely useless. Toughness 5, which is very nice. It means the majority of anti-infantry weapons in the game will be wounding them not as well as, say, toughness 4 models, which is the vast majority of the army. The big one, they have 3 wounds apiece. That is absolutely delicious. It means that even a las cannon will only kill 2/3 of the time a single model where it manages to wound, and that is quite survivable. They're wounding on 3 ups instead of 2 ups, and they need to roll a 3 up just to get 3 wounds and finish off a model, and you have to fail your save as well, so it's actually quite a survivable stat line, 3 wounds. 3 wound infantry is the new hotness. You got Gravis Armour, Terminators, and Scorpec Destroyers, which are all 3 wound apiece, and they're very nice. And now with the Death Guard coming out, you've got Blightlord Terminators, 3 wounds apiece, very survivable. It's a great benchmark. It basically makes you the most heaviest armoured infantry and survivable in the game. Moving on, you see that they have 2 attacks each, 3 for the Sergeant. That's fairly standard for a Primaris Marine. It's a troops choice. You're not going to expect them to cut through hordes of orcs, but they're fairly competitive in the sense that they do get shock assaults, they get the extra attack anyway, so if you do have to use them in a pinch in close combat, it's not the end of the world and they can do a little bit of work for you. Leadership, 7 and 8 respectively, 8 for the Sergeant. Again, it's what you expect. It's not particularly good, but then for a 5-man squad, it's pretty much got you covered. You're not likely to lose any models anyway, for morale purposes. Can be a problem if there are certain attacks that do target the leadership of a model, but there's not many of those, and for the most part they're not going to be used and wasted on Heavy Intercessor squads anyway. Very lastly, they have a 3+ save. Again, it's exactly what you expect from a model that's in power armour. They've got no real abilities. They've got the standard Angels of Death and combat squads. You're never really going to use combat squads for this unit. You'll probably take 2 squads rather than 1 big squad and combat squad it. Angel of Death is great because it gives them shock assault and bolter drill. Very nice moves. And yeah, it's got the usual faction keywords that you expect. Imperium, Adeptus Astartes and Chapter, Infantry, Corps, Primaris, Intercessors, Mark 10 Gravis Armour, and Heavy Intercessor Squad. What are their weaponry? Well, as befits quite a tough and resilient looking unit, they're tanks with weapons essentially. They've got heavy bolt rifles, which are essentially bolters that have been converted into heavy bolters. They have strength 5 -1 AP. 36 range, rapid fire 1 and damage 1. It's a very effective weapon. However, for the amount of models that are firing, they don't get a lot of shots. So it's not going to be carving through hordes of orcs, but it will do a little bit of work for you, which isn't too bad. Crucially, it's a very long range weapon. Range 36, which means at 18 inches you're going to get 2 shots apiece, which is very handy, to be honest. It means that you can move up the table and likely be in rapid fire range if you need to be. Next up is the Hellstorm bolt rifle. It's still got a decent range, even if it is less than the heavy bolt rifle. 30 inches is nothing to be sniffed at. It's got effective reach range of 35 because you're going to be able to move and then fire with this unit. They've got assault 3 weapons, which means If you need to advance, you can, although obviously you sacrifice a little bit of shooting potential in that you have a -1 to hit. They are strength 5 but no AP. Of course, in the tactical doctrine, which would be for 2 turns, if you need them to be, they will be -1 AP, so that's not terrible. But it also means they get an extra shot no matter how far away they are compared to the heavy bolt rifle. So this is a very favoured one for a lot of players. Lastly, and with Space Marines all going to 2 wounds apiece, you have the Executor bolt rifle, which is a range 42, which is massive, heavy 1, which is not great, it's only 1 shot apiece, strength 5, -2 AP, which is very effective, and 2 damage, which means that this unit is great for holding an objective and taking out other Marines. Very nice to see, and it can also contribute against shooting heavy vehicles. 2 damage is very nice, and if you roll an entire attack from a unit at a vehicle, you might get a couple of shots through, and that could do 2 or 4 damage, which will contribute greatly to your war effort. Finally, regarding weapons choices, is a heavy weapon which is tied to whatever bolter choice you choose. But for just 10 points apiece, you have 1 per 5 models. I recommend taking it. It really increases the power of the unit on the table, and if you're going to be using it, as I recommend it later on after this, as a defensive unit to hold objectives, you're going to want that heavy weapon. It also gives Primaris only players a chance to use the Hellfire Shell stratagem, which is lovely. So you get a standard heavy bolter if you take heavy bolt rifles in the unit. That's quite a nice choice. Strength 5, -1 AP, 2 damage. It's pretty useful across the table. But if you take the Hellstorm bolt rifles, you get a Hellstorm heavy bolter, which is heavy 4, very nice. Strength 5, no AP, which isn't great, but that's not terrible. And you get 2 damage apiece. So you actually get more shots at slightly weaker armor penetration. Still range 30, which is still fairly good. Lastly, we have the Executor heavy bolter, which is range 42, which is immense. Heavy 2, okay, it's not bad. Strength 5, -2 AP and 3 damage. This is your heavy infantry killer. This whole squad is, if it's armed with Executor bolt rifles. So what do I recommend for the unit on the table? Well, I recommend its use should be a fairly defensive one or holding objectives. You don't want these launching an assault into the enemy's deployment zone. They're too slow. They haven't got the close combat capacity, so you don't bother wasting them into a repulsor. Put the aggressors in the repulsor or the blade guard. Heavy intercessor squads, they should be marching up the table, taking objectives, holding objectives, and supporting the rest of your army with a bit of firepower. On that note, their firepower is fairly average. They've got some good firepower on an individual basis, but as a squad, you're spending 150 points, because you're spending 10 points on the heavy weapon, on 5 dudes who aren't going to be able to completely rinse another opposing unit. I mean, look at Devastator squads and their killing capacity in comparison. What this unit gives you, if you look at it on a purely killing basis, isn't as good as what you can get elsewhere. However, what they do give you is a heavy troops choice, which can't be eliminated very quickly or easily without quite a lot of dedication, and it can soak fire from your other super heavy infantry. They're also not very easy to remove with obscuring terrain and objective holding. Generally, since I don't really consider this unit to be operating up close unless, of course, the opponent is assaulting them, and then, of course, it's a tactical play there. You know, what have you got in support? What are you going to do with this squad to protect that objective, etc. What I would do with this squad is hold the line. Use them to support their firepower, the attack force. Use them to hold that objective and be too much for most lightly equipped troops choices to handle. If you consider that you're going to be facing a lot of Marines, or you're going to be hiding at the back of the table, take the Executor bolt rifles. The damage 2, damage 3 heavy bolter is going to do a lot of work for you, and it can contribute to hurting vehicles if you need to in a pinch. The internet wisdom likes to talk about Hellstorm bolt rifles. 3 shots is better than 2, and you often get 1 depending on the range, and you get it up to 30 inches. Strength 5 is still effective even if it has no AP, so a lot of people will stick to the Hellstorm bolt rifles simply because if you're not planning on using the extra damage from the Executor bolt rifles, you're getting more shots and you're going to be doing more effective amount of damage to infantry. That said, heavy bolt rifles, they're still good weapons. You're still going to be in range most of the time. I mean, 18 inches is a great rapid fire range. You can take advantage of the fact that they're going to have -1 AP. Again, it's up to you what you've modelled them with. If you want the hyper competitive choice, you either take the Executor bolt rifles or the Hellstorm bolt rifles, but it's not the end of the world if you do have a heavy bolt rifle squad. They're still good, they're still going to be effective, and the difference in the amount of damage you're putting out is going to be fairly low in comparison to something big like a heavy bolt or Devastator squad or whatever. So what support does this unit have on the table? Well, as a core unit, they benefit from a lot of the bonuses that Space Marine characters can give. Things like captains that are hanging around the back of the table or hang around your objective scoring units, they will benefit your heavy intercessors. Things like chaplains, they can work, but then I think your chaplain should probably be working with other units. But in a pinch, you know, a litany of battle can help out. As we all know, Catechism of Fire, +1 to wound, that's very effective if you're wounded on a 3+, you're now wounded on a 2+. So on that basis, chaplains can really help out, but again, it affects the closest enemy unit, which means you have to put these up the table, which means they're going to be quite slow. You're probably going to save that for a more aggressive moving unit, or perhaps say Terminators that have teleported in and you're using a chaplain alongside them. It obviously depends on your build. Apothecaries, well, they're great for heavy intercessors because they can bring back a model from the dead, and it's an expensive model. The more expensive the model, the more likely you're going to get the benefit of the points value of it. If you're holding the line, holding objectives, and you have an apothecary nearby, do not hesitate to use it on heavy intercessors unless it's something much more survivable or much more points efficient to bring back, such as perhaps a Blade Guard veteran or a Terminator. But again, that's a as and when situation. If you're running strategically based armies based with a chief apothecary or an apothecary alongside this unit, enjoy what they give you. Next up, Company Ancients. Well, Company Ancients, they're quite useful if they're, again, holding the line. They're in amongst the battle brethren. Company Ancient can really help out the heavy intercessors with their last shots before they go down, make it quite a punishing situation for the opponent, and you're getting more out of them. Combine that with an apothecary, and you have quite a frustrating, difficult unit to remove. Lieutenants, of course, they help core units. They can help you reroll 1s to wound. Again, will you need this? If you have a gun line of infantry squads, then this will really help you out. It depends on your army build. It depends how aggressive you're being. If you're marching up the table with plenty of infantry, as you might be doing with heavy intercessor squads, lieutenants are great for bonuses. Little point of warning, if you use all of these characters to try and support your heavy intercessors, you're probably wasting a lot of points. So try and pick what you need for your army, what can help out, and then consider how it could also affect heavy intercessors alongside them. Don't try and stack captains with lieutenants, with chaplains using Catechism of Fire, using apothecaries to keep them alive, and a Company Ancient to make them quite tenacious. It's too much for just 5 dudes. Even if you have a full squad of 10, it's still a lot. On that basis, how big a squad will I take? I'd take 5-man. You're talking 140 points for 1 troops choice. 280 points if you want a 10-man squad. I mean, we're starting to get into the realms of a lot of points now. In fact, a 10-man squad, you could actually get 3 tactical squads, bare minimum for that points, and you've covered your troops choices and don't have to fork out any more. Remember, a 10-man intercessor squad is but 1 troops choice. If you want a full battalion, you're going to need 3, and you're starting to fork out a lot of points on what is essentially not going to be as damaging to the opponent in a pure points per kill ratio as other choices might be. That doesn't mean a 10-man squad is completely useless and won't work. If that is your jam, have a big unit in the centre that march up the table and hold that objective, put the command points into that, put the defence into it as much as you can, and you want to support them with characters, they are your core, well then you've got a reasonable core there. You're not completely wasting all your points, but just remember that your other troops choices are probably going to have to be cheap enough to make sure that that's worthwhile. Remember, large footprint, that means you're going to be assaulted more often. It also means that you spread across the board, can't take much advantage of obscuring terrain. There are problems to having a large squad of large models, so remember that when you build the unit. If you have a very specific build in mind, it potentially can work, but I think you'd be better off with 2 squads of 5 than you would be with 1 squad of 10. Also, I would probably admit that I'd stick to 1 squad per army. Sure, 5 men might not seem like great, but You know, you can always add an extra 1 or 2 guys in there if you have a few points left over. It will bump up the survivability of the unit and then make them a little bit more effective. However, you don't want to fork too many points into your troops, remember. One squad means that you have one squad to focus all your stratagem support on, and the opponent can't just switch to the other squad as well. Which brings us nicely onto stratagem support. Being Primaris, you get quite a lot of stratagem support. You have transhuman physiology, 1 command point for 5 models, more than 5 models, 2 command points, another reason to take the minimum squad. Admittedly, you're not always going to be taking advantage of transhuman physiology because you've got toughness 5, but if there's ever a case where you want to keep your unit from getting absolutely destroyed in close combat through potentially power fists, you might have blood angels that are wounding you on +1 or chaplain support, things like that, you want to take that away, use transhuman physiology. 5-man squad, popping that, will survive all sorts of firepower that's coming at them. And you never know, if you get hit with something that's strength 10, battle cannons and things like that, destroyers, particularly heavy destroyers, they can do a number on most units and they will enjoy firing at a heavily armoured model that they can instant kill. That's where transhuman physiology can come in. Other things like gene wrought might, not necessarily effective for this unit, depends. I mean, if you've got a large squad that charges into the opponent, or you've got a full squad of 5 that's charging into this squad of, say, orcs, and you need to kill as many as possible, it can be useful, but I'd rather use that on a dedicated melee unit or one that has more attacks, particularly things such as Blade Guard, but it can be useful, so bear it in mind, but don't jump to it straight away, and it's definitely probably not going to do much against Space Marines. The standout stratagem for Heavy Intercessors, to me, is unyielding in the face of the foe. Because they're in Mark 10 Gravis armor, they benefit from this. A weapon that fires at them that has a damage characteristic of 1 allocated to a model in the unit, that model gets +1 to its armor saves. I absolutely love this stratagem, I think it's amazing, and it could be combined with transhuman physiology if you want to make something really difficult to remove, but basically it means that you're going to be having a 2+ armor save for damage 1 weapons that are trying to torrent the unit to death. It makes it even more hard. With a toughness of 5, damage 1 weapon, you're just not going to do enough damage to a 2+ armor save unit. It makes them more survivable than Terminators at that point. It can be used in any phase, which includes the shooting and melee phases, and that is great. It means that you can use it twice in a turn for most games and really get survivability out of a unit that might be central to your objective scoring plans. So on that note, what armies benefit the most from Heavy Intercessors? Most Space Marines can get a lot of use out of them. I don't think there's any which really struggle. They really stand out for just about every army. They have bolt weapons which instantly screams Crimson Fists, Imperial Fist, but of course that doesn't really just mean them who can benefit. Anyone who's trying to hold ground with a really tough and tenacious unit can use Heavy Intercessors. Space Marines like Ultramarines, they get a lot of work out of a Heavy Intercessor because obviously they have the benefit of the tactical doctrine. And the more melee-oriented armies such as Blood Angels and Space Wolves, they have a really tough unit that can hold the line and even assault a little bit where need be because of their Primaris stats. Basically, I do recommend this unit in certain builds. It's very good if you've got other elite heavy infantry. I think being able to put more target saturation on the board so the opponent has to really choose what to go for. Imagine Terminators dropping in and you've got a unit of these holding the central objective. Which do you go for? The people taking your objectives in your deployment zone who are very dangerous like the Terminators, or you try and stop the Space Marine player from scoring his secondary objectives? Of course, they don't always have a place, and that is up to the individual to determine how much they need the target saturation, how much they need a strong presence in the middle of the table. I, for example, quite like having support elements in heavy weapons, so I quite like the idea of Heavy Intercessors alongside Tactical Marines, because you essentially got a big brother to help look after your Tactical Marines that give you all the different weapons, and you've still got their heavy weapon from the sense of the heavy bolters that come with the Heavy Intercessors. So again, it depends on your army build and how you want to go. Anyway, that's it from me. That's all there really is to say about this unit. Please let me know in the comments below, and please like and subscribe, help me support the channel, and I'll catch up with you soon. Peace out.